and welcome. I'd like to tell you a little bit about what I think is the way to approach the world that we live in today through the lens of Judaism. Let me start with an image. I believe that when we're born, we're given a musical instrument to play. And probably because each of us is different, we're given different musical instruments, one that suits us. But I guess because it's so Jewish, I'll use a violin as an example. So imagine that when you're born, you're given a violin to play. And the ideal of life is that you become a master violinist, that you are able to play that violin absolutely beautifully and make incredible music. But what usually happens is we'll learn a little bit of violin and we get busy with lots of things in our lives. We're learning lots of other skills. And by the time we get to 12 or 13, we graduate and people say, well done, yes, you learned a bit of violin, excellent, mazel tov or siman tov. And then the violin, sadly, usually, goes into a cupboard and it's left alone to gather dust. Usually through our teenage years and our young adult years, we kind of know that the violin's there and that reassures us, and we're sure that one day we'll take it out again and we'll play it again, but really the violin just stays in the cupboard. Maybe we take it out every now and then and we'll play a couple of songs, but they feel a little bit childish and we never really learnt any adult songs on it, so it doesn't really mean anything to us except memories of when we were young. And hopefully those are good memories, but the violin goes back into the cupboard. Then what usually happens is either because of some kind of crisis, which could be, God forbid, somebody in the family dies or is very sick, or maybe it's more a spiritual crisis, you're looking for meaning in the world, and then you go into the cupboard and you dig out the violin and you get it out and you play it, and because you haven't played for so long, it sounds really bad and you kind of feel like, this isn't really what I'm looking for right now. And sadly, the violin goes back into the cupboard. Usually, it'll stay in the cupboard for the rest of one's life. And that is a tragedy because, as I'm sure you've worked out, the violin is your connection with Judaism. And what ideally we should have is we should have a passionate, fantastic, incredible connection with Judaism. And that violin should play music throughout our lives. Sad music when we're sad, happy music when we rejoice, deep and meaningful, incredible music. And we should ultimately be masters of our instrument. But most of us aren't. Most of us get a little bit of tutoring up until we're 13. If we're in a day school or if we're in a youth movement, maybe we'll get a bit in our teenage years as well. But it doesn't allow us to really become excellent. And so the instrument never feels like it's an intimate part of ourselves. I had this journey in my life. Up until 13, bar mitzvah, and then I was pretty much done. That was it. Jewish education, finito. I was lucky that I got involved with a youth movement, and I was lucky that I had madrachim that were prepared to ask me questions that got me thinking about the deeper meaning of life. And so that set me on the road of the path of starting to question why I was who I was, why am I Jewish, and how does my Judaism impact the world that I live in? How can I look at the world through the lens of these incredible resources that Judaism has, these texts and the philosophy and the rituals and the prayers. And this set me on a journey which is still continuing today. I'm still learning and living and loving being able to play my instrument in the way that I play it. What was important for me to realize is that just like with music, everybody has their own way and everybody interprets music in their own way. Even if the sheet music is the same, they still interpret that music in their own way. And initially, I thought that they were wrong because, of course, I was right. And it took me many years to realize that actually those different interpretations are all okay. They're all legitimate interpretations. They're just different. So that got me to think that I needed to explore and really learn the many different ways that Judaism is interpreted. And in my adult life, I was fortunate, I was blessed to be able to study at the feet of some great rabbis, some of them Orthodox or Chabad or Progressive or Conservative, all around the world, in Israel, in America, in England, in many different places that my travels took me, even an underground yeshiva in Moscow. But all the time, what I was doing was trying to learn how those texts and their interpretations impacted me. And that's why I find myself, as a rabbi in the progressive community today, trying to empower people. So I'm not the kind of rabbi that says, you must do this or you must think that. I'm more the kind of rabbi that says, well, Judaism has these incredible tools. Let me help you learn those tools and see how they might work for you. So that plays out in all kinds of ways. It plays out in the ritual world. So I don't say to you, oh, you need to daven Shachrit, Mincha, and Mariv every day. You need to lay Tefillin, Talit. Rather, what I'll say is, let's learn about these prayers and what they mean. Let's learn about Tefillin. Let's learn about Talit. And let's learn about why they might be helpful and meaningful in your life. That's what I see my job as Rav, as teacher, is teaching and empowering people. So let's see now how this applies with different issues that Judaism needs to confront. So one of the major cutting-edge issues of the religious world today is the issue of gender. The role of men and women, the role of LGBTQIA issues, and each of the different religions and each of the different movements and groups, denominations within those religions are grappling with what it means to identify and deal with gender difference. So, for example, the progressive movement has long seen the struggle for men and women to have equal opportunities and responsibilities as a core principle of their movement. So, if you were to go to a progressive bar or bat mitzvah, you would see pretty much no difference between what happens. Both of them happen at 13 years old. A bar and a bat mitzvah will wear a talit. They will read from the Torah and the Haftarah. They will give a Devar Torah in shul on a Shabbos morning, and they will lead part of the service. So there's no separation or distinction between a bar or a bat mitzvah in what they are responsible for doing, because literally bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah means a son or daughter of the commandment, mitzvah. And we understand that both boys and girls, men and women, are equally commanded. They are equally responsible for doing mitzvot. And so their ceremony is identical. And this works right the way through Judaism, whether it's a baby blessing ceremony, whether it's a Shabbat morning where we're calling men and women up to the Torah, whether we would ordain men and women as rabbis, which the progressive movement does and has done for decades. The approach is that men and women have equal responsibility and equal opportunities within the Jewish religion. Now, that's not to say that 2,000 years of rabbinic texts and 1,000 years of biblical texts agree. So what do we do when we find that a text says something and we actually believe that that text is not consonant with our values? It doesn't agree with the way that we approach gender in the 21st century. So a progressive approach, which is seen as a approach that is based on education, so we make informed decisions, is to look at what does the Torah say on the topic, what have the rabbis said, and I'm talking about 2,000 years of rabbinic writings, and then what does contemporary wisdom say in the world today, not just Jewish, from across the world. And any approach, for example gender, would take all of those into consideration. Having studied the topic fully, we would then make our educated decision. So on the issue of women and women's inclusivity, there are texts that are very empowering to women. There are texts that are very disempowering to women. And looking around at the world that we live in and taking the wisdom of today's contemporary culture that we live in, we would find a way to balance those texts with the contemporary wisdom, to find a way and a path that works. And that's how we've made decisions like ordaining women rabbis and including men and women equally in ritual and prayer. And that would also extend to sexual orientation. So, for example, when I came back to South Africa, when I moved back 11 years ago, South Africa had just become one of the first countries in the world to allow for civil unions, men and men to, or women and women to be married and recognized by the state as married. So, of course, all the religious groups were responding. What were they going to do? And the official Jewish response was, no, homosexuality is an abomination, and we would never condone two men being married. So our movement, the Progressive movement, made an educated decision process where our rabbis and our lay people studied the texts. What does the Torah say? What do the rabbis say? What do contemporary psychologists and theoreticians say on this topic? And we made the decision to allow our rabbis to perform same-sex marriages. In fact, the original proposal was to do same-sex unions, and it was our lay movement, not even the rabbis, who were certainly pushing for the unions. The lay movement said, we want you to do these, but we don't even want you to do them as unions. If you're going to marry a man and a woman and call that a marriage, a wedding, why wouldn't you do the same for a man and a man, or a woman and a woman? So our movement was very cutting edge and brave in its decision to encourage our rabbis to do same-sex marriages, which we have been doing for the last 10 years. So again, this is not. People often think, oh, you're a progressive Jew, that means you can eat anything, you can do anything, there's no rules. There are very, very clear rules, and they are based on that process of educated and informed decision making. So there's a clear path of study, whether that's done by the person, or that's done by a community, or it's done by a group of rabbis. There is a process of study, after which that community makes an informed decision. So today in our community, gay or lesbian, transgender, intersex Jews have full rights and responsibilities in our community. They can be married by our rabbis, and they can be completely seen as part of our community, and if they're raising families, their families are Jewish families welcomed and raised within our synagogue. So to maybe tie this short talk together is to say that there's not one right way to be Jewish, and as a progressive rabbi, I would say if you are happy and content in an Orthodox synagogue, if you're affiliated to Chabad or to Osamach, if you're Sephardi, Ashkenazi, as long as the adjective before Jewish is inspired. If you're an inspired Jew, I'm happy. Do your thing and be inspired. So I'm not going to say that there's a particular movement or denomination or stream that is right. What I am going to say is that there needs to be a variety of streams of Judaism so that people can find their way. That's not to say one is right or wrong. It's to say that there are many paths, and if those paths are giving people inspiration and their Judaism is meaningful in their lives, then I'm glad to hear it, and Mazel Tov, keep doing what you're doing. If you're frustrated, if you're not finding what you want to in Judaism, then I would say it's probably that you need a teacher, and you need to find a community that is supportive of the values and ideals that you have and are looking for, and that Judaism has an incredibly deep and meaningful pool of resources that can help you to find your way. So thank you very much for being with me for this short talk, and I'm Rabbi Greg, and wishing you all the best.